very glad to meet you properly because you were really my first cookery teacher after my mother, because I was a very keen cook as a child, and when I was 11, an Italian lodger who was a student of my mother's gave me, when she left, a copy of your complete cookery course, the Leith Complete Cookery Course. And throughout my teens, it was my Bible. So I learnt from you how to pluck pheasants, poach salmon, make choux pastry.
Good.
So anyway, have you always loved cooking? How did you? I mean, did you enjoy eating?
No, not at all. You know, I grew up in South Africa, and I was, you know, sort of privileged white daughter of very well-off parents, and so it just never occurred to anybody in my family. My mother was a terrible cook. My father was the generation that men didn't cook, and so it never occurred to anybody that I would be a cook, and it didn't occur to me either. I was always greedy. You know, I used to like food. But I now realise, well, I realised later, I went to France and then I got keen on cooking and I realised that I could be a cook. And I went back to Johannesburg, all inspired and taking French recipes with me and thinking that I would teach our Zulu cook how to make all these things. And actually, as I was cooking with him, I realised that he could have taught me everything. You know, he would be uncurdling my hollandaise and chopping like a pro, and I didn't know any of this as a child because I hardly went in the kitchen.
Mm. But did you enjoy eating? Did you eat good food?
No, I was always very greedy. Always very greedy. And my father used to love, we all loved food. My father used to take me out without my brothers, which was the important thing, on treats to go out to smart restaurants. And I had my first snails when I was about 14, which they must have been imported from France and they'd come in a can and they would have been. But the lovely thing was that I loved all the business of eating, you know, the way you hold the nice little tongs to hold the, and of course all they tasted was lovely garlic butter, which I loved. But I liked the business of food, and I liked chicken in the basket because you could get your hands into it, and you know, there was a little bowl with floating petals in it, and you washed your hands in that. Actually what you were eating was very, very chicken-like from Nando's.
So why did you go to Paris in the first place?
I went to Paris because I thought at that stage I'd like to be an interpreter. Mm-hmm. And the only reason I thought that is that I'd already been to drama school to be an actress, and then to art school to do stage design, and then to architecture school to be an architect. And in each one of them I just flunked out really. Or I lost interest, or I was no good at it, or didn't have the whatever. And so my parents were despairing, and at that point I got very keen on going to France. And I was in Cape Town at university, and I thought Cape Town was the end of the earth, and it was like sort of provinces, and I had to get to Europe. So I persuaded them that I wanted to learn French. And I think it was my father thinking, oh gosh, should we go doing this forever? And then when I got there, I decided I didn't want to be an interpreter, I wanted to be a cook.
Why? How? What happened in Paris?
Well, I worked for a woman, as I was an au pair, and I worked for this woman, Madame van Boxtel, her name was, and on the first morning that I was there, she took me shopping, as the French do, for bread. And we went to 3 different shops. One for the baguette, one for the gâteau basque, we were in Bayonne, and one, we were on holiday. So one for the gâteau basque, one for the baguette, and one for the croissant. And I remember when we got all these 3, and we had the 2 little toddlers I was supposed to be looking after with us, I said, why do we go to 3 shops? They all sell everything. And she looked at me as if I was a complete idiot, which of course I was. And then she cooked everything we ate, the children ate. They just ate it at 5 o'clock and they ate it whizzed up. But apart from that, there was no difference. And I sort of suddenly thought food's important, and it matters what goes in your children's faces, and it matters what... And I thought, you know what, you don't have to be black to be a cook.
So did you learn to cook from her? Or did
I then went to another woman, that was just a holiday job, and then when I went back to Paris, and I went first to the Alliance Française and then to the Sorbonne, while I was doing that I was working for another family, and they had a Portuguese cook, and she taught me a few more things. And then finally I went to the Cordon Bleu in London.
Oh.
And I did the advanced course, which was a bit of a cheat because the qualifications for getting into the advanced course was you had to have done their intermediate course, or you had to have worked in a restaurant. So I went for this interview and I said, that I've been working in a restaurant in Paris for a year, which is true, but I hadn't said I've been washing up and waitressing. I just bluffed my way in.
And after that, you were working as a private caterer, is that right?
Yeah.
And then when was it? Was it 69 that you opened Leith's?
Yeah, the restaurant.
Yeah, because I mean, what was the British food scene like at that time?
It was unbelievably dire. I mean, I thought South African food must be pretty boring, but at least it was enlivened by so things like fresh pineapple and a bit of Malay spices and things. And when I came to England, restaurant cooking had really suffered because the two wars had meant that they could no longer afford the sort of brigades of chefs that they'd had under Escoffier in the 20s and 30s. And austerity meant that the ingredients weren't brilliant. And also things like avocados and broccoli hadn't arrived. So you got very dull food, rather badly cooked, with lots of short cuts because they didn't have the labour. I mean, in the old days, to give you an example, before the wars, if you wanted a brilliantly smooth sauce, you pushed it through a tammy cloth. You put it in a muslin cloth. One of you twisted one end, one of you twisted the other, like a swoon towel. And the resulting sauce that got squished through was as, glossy and smooth as anything. Well, nobody could afford to have two people standing there doing that anymore. But they didn't have a liquidizer yet, which is what happens today, or, anything mechanical. So the food was dire. Very smart restaurants, all the menus were exactly the same. Pheasant soup were off, mignon frappé, they were all written in French. So in a way it was quite easy to get into the restaurant business because I had the advantage that I was a woman, so I got more publicity than otherwise, I guess. And you only had to be half good to be good. I mean, I wasn't very good, but we didn't have a freezer, and we cooked everything from fresh, and that was newsworthy. Because at the time, can you believe it, things like tinned celery hearts and frozen food was just coming in, so frozen broccoli was a big, exotic, amazing thing. So I thought what I'd like is a restaurant that is friendly and people are nice to you and the house wine is so good that they're pleased when you order it, and where everything's all in one price. So I opened Leith's with a fixed price menu for 4 courses of £2.12 and 6pence. And that was a lot of money. But it took me, it took me and our various chefs 25 years to get a Michelin star. That's how bad we were. I mean, it took a long, long time. But we did it in the end.
And apart from, you said that being a woman, you won a lot of attention. But apart from that, there can't have been many women working as chefs or running restaurants at that time, were there?
There was Madame Prunier, her husband had a restaurant in St James. And there was a wonderful woman, and I've forgotten her name now, but there was a restaurant called Chez Solange in Soho, which was a sort of brasserie, bistro type. And then there was April Ashley, who was a transvestite, or actually transsexual. She was a man, and then she became a woman.
And a cook.
And a cook, April Ashley. She wasn't a cook really, but she became a cook. And she had a pub down near World's End, I think. But that was the 4 of us.
And did you all know each other?
No, I knew Madame Prunier slightly. She terrified the socks off me. I mean, I think I was the first woman to have a serious restaurant that I owned rather than inheriting it from my father or my. So it did make a lot of.
Do you think of yourself as a feminist? Did you see yourself as a pioneer?
No, I didn't. But then after a while, I began to realise just how unfair life was for women at work, and especially in our trade. And it's still unfair, but it's unfair. There's nothing you can do about it because the truth is that women. People often say to me, "Why don't women get? Why are the top chefs men?" And they nearly always are. And if you look at the top chefs who are women, they're mostly not married. And the reason is that if you want a Michelin star, which let's say that's the judge, how to judge a good chef, you have to work at night. If you work at night, you have to have your partner has to look after the children. And men don't do that, or won't do that. And so women tend to go into bakery because they can do it in the day, or into brasseries where they have split shifts and they just do the day shift. Men do the night shift and men get the glory. But it doesn't mean women can't cook.
But you've managed to do, I mean, not only the restaurant, but all the other amazing things you've done, and you've raised a couple of children. So
Yeah, no, but I've been very lucky because, first of all, I'm not the best cook I know, I'm not the best manager I know, I'm not the best accountant I know or anything else. But I know enough to know a good one when I see one. And so I've been fantastic at delegation. And I really like to hire people who are better than me. And it's a brilliant recipe because they do all the hard graft and you get the glory. I mean, what could be better than that? But I also think if you love business, which I do, you tend to form a quite happy team, and we had very good people. Quite a few of them said, "Why have you written such a negative book? It's all about disasters." And the fact is, you remember the disasters. You don't remember the glories. But I must have done something right because, you know, I was in business for such a long time. It was very, very successful. I mean, I ended up employing about 500 people, so I can't have done it all wrong. But I do think when you read the chapters on the business, it just seems to be one, you know, near miss from. I mean, there's one story about when we were doing an enormous party for the Tate Gallery, and the old Tate Gallery on Millbank, and I walked in at about 6 o'clock that evening to see how the guys were getting on, and I could smell fermenting soup from 2 galleries away. And I just thought, I hope that isn't what I think it is. So I told them to put it in the back of my van, 2 great big saucepans of it. And I took it to the school, which we just opened the school then, and there was nobody there. And I called all the school teachers, and they all came running, and we made instant soup. I mean, what went into that soup? I can't tell you. I just said everybody to bring anything white. You know, it could be tin mussel soup, tin vichyssoise, cream cheese, stock, milk, anything, and I got the restaurant to send us a whole lot. And we made this mixture, which was sort of creamy, white, God knows what was in it. It was absolutely delicious. And I think, it says mussel soup on the menu, will anybody notice? Nobody noticed. And when they wrote to me afterwards to say how great it was, they said somebody pointed out that the soup was absolutely delightful. So.
With the school, Leith School of Food and Wine, you set that up, 5 or 6 years after you opened the restaurant?
Yes.
Yeah. And was that because you wanted a new project, or did you have a sense of mission to try and improve the British food scene?
Well, I mean, I'm always one of those energetic people who think that they should get stuck in and do something. But the real reason was that I had noticed Caroline Wardgrave, who was my head chef on the catering side. She was then Caroline Burrows. And I had noticed her a couple of times with an arm round some weeping girl who'd just been with us for 2 days, saying very firmly, you know, this is how we cut the carrots here, but don't worry, you know, in a few days you'll feel better. Your first job is always terrifying. And she would be both very friendly, but very firm about how it's to be done. And I thought she's a perfect teacher. You know, she doesn't give away, she doesn't say that's fine just because she wants to comfort the child or girl or boy. And so when she left us, which she did shortly afterwards, I'd been churning about what about school? Because it bugged me that there we were, retraining people who came out of catering college. Because catering colleges at that time didn't teach anybody anything about food. They didn't teach them about where food came from, or any love of food, or anything about sourcing or organics, or they never taught them. They didn't teach them to love cooking or love food. They just taught them technique. And these young lads particularly would come out of catering college and they would never have eaten or tasted anything like a squid or, you know, herring or anything, because I didn't do that. But they could do it perfectly. The technique was perfect, but no flavour. Catering colleges didn't even require people to taste their food.
Was that a very British thing, you think?
I think so. It must have been. Anyway, but on the other hand, mostly girls who worked for me came out of private cookery schools like the Cordon Bleu, where they did learn a love of food and they did learn how to taste. But their technique was a bit up to rubbish, you know, they would be a bit messy. not. So anyway, I thought, well, we'll have a school, we'll combine the best of both, and done for. So we did. And Caroline, because she was so good at it, she became the. I'd never have started without Caroline.
Did you teach yourself there at all, or were you mainly sort of managing it?
I taught myself. I loved teaching. I used to. I mean, this is almost the most satisfying thing to do, is to take somebody who's never cooked anything and spend 3 hours with them, and you must know this, and you go, and at the end of 3 hours they've made 3 dishes, all of which they never thought they could do in 100 years, and they know that they did it. It's just, it's terrific.
Yeah, because it seems that, I mean, cooking has become one of the most, I mean, so teaching about food has become one of the most important things, hasn't it? With focus on food,
That's
teaching school
Yes,
children
exactly,
and teachers,
exactly.
and the Hoxton Apprentice,
Yes, exactly.
teaching unemployed youths.
You have done your homework.
And also with slow food, you're a trustee of slow food,
Yes,
and you're
I
involved
am.
in educational
I know,
projects.
I'm
So-
very boring about food. I really think that cooking and knowing how to eat, never mind cooking, but knowing how to eat is quite as important as knowing how to add up or knowing how to read. Probably knowing how to read is the most important thing, because it helps you with everything else. And if you can read, you might teach yourself to cook. If you can cook, you won't be able to teach yourself to read. But at the end of a school life, to leave school ignorant about food, when it makes such, I mean, it matters to our health, it matters to the economy, it matters to the planet, it matters to one's own enjoyment of life. It's just crazy not to teach people.
Do you think, because, I mean, it's so evident in this country there has been a kind of revolution in food, in the kind of ingredients that are available, in the renaissance of artisanal food production and the availability of good produce. But do you think that's just a sort of urban middle class thing, or do you think that it's kind of filtering out into all sections of society?
Well, I think you can never generalise about these things, because yes, I mean, you do. You know, if you go to a farmer's market, I live in the Cotswolds, which is a pretty rich part of the world, so most people at a farmer's market will be pretty well off. But some people won't be. They'll be there because they have, you know, maybe their mum cooked or they're interested or something, and they won't be buying the expensive things, but they will be buying maybe, you know, organic vegetables or the cheaper cuts of meat and stuff, because they know how to cook. I mean, I'm sorry, I like a bloody record, but the truth is, it all starts with the ability to cook, because if you can cook, you start to see the pleasure of it. And yeah, I mean, there are lots of schemes about helping poorer families to learn to cook, but it is much more difficult because you're dealing with adults who don't want to ever be told that they're not doing the right thing, which is fair enough. Why should they be? You know, they're doing their best. Every mum does their best for their children. But, you know, that's why I have brutally said, let's put all the resources we have on the children, because the children are captive, they're in school, and they're receptive to new ideas. Grown-ups, if I can generalise, are generally not captive, unless they're in prison, which is another place we should be teaching cooking and food. Unless they're in prison or in hospital or in care or whatever, all of these government places, which is where I think we should concentrate all our efforts.
On a completely different tack.
Yes.
What do you think about the new modernist cuisine, sometimes known as molecular gastronomy, about this sort of sous vide cooking? Heston food, yes. Are you interested at all?
I am, but I'm only interested in, because I've spent my life in food, so of course I find it interesting, but I would rather go to Heston's Little Chef. If I was just taking a couple of people out to dinner, I'd rather go to Heston's Little Chef down in wherever it is, on the 303 in Hampshire somewhere, than go to Heston's Fat Duck. Because ultimately, if I went with you, or I went with another chef, or as I did, I went to El Bulli with my restaurant manager, my daughter who's mad about food, and another restaurateur, and we had a wonderful time because we were prepared to be interrupted 50 times during 3 hours with somebody coming with another little salt spoonful of a taste and telling us, now take a slug of tequila, wait 2 minutes and then taste this, or, you know, put these headphones on and, hear the sea or whatever it was, because we were interested. But I mean, I remember taking my husband to the Fat Duck, and I mean, he just couldn't believe it. I mean, he was a very intelligent writer and we had an interesting bunch of people around the table, and he wanted to talk to them, and these waiters kept coming up and talking to us about food, which he really wasn't interested in. So I think it's all about the company. You have to go with other food nuts.
Mm. Do you think that it has a good influence, I mean, in getting people excited about food?
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, I think all these things are terrific. I think, you know, I don't think it matters how you get people interested, as long as you get people interested. I'm perfectly happy with, you know, if there's an audience for Nigella, an audience for Jamie, an audience for Nigel, you know, everybody argues about who's the best and who's right and who's wrong. As long as they're, you know, basically getting people interested in food. Good on them.
And all these different fields, so you've been a caterer, a restaurateur, teacher, educator, businesswoman. You won, was it Berkeley Code Businesswoman of the Year?
I did, yeah.
Charity, government advice, and now you're a novelist, right? You've written, is it 5 novels?
5 novels, yeah.
And you raised a family, etc. But of all these things that you've done, you know, which are your proudest achievements?
You're not allowed to say your children, of course, but they are my proudest achievement. I remember when my son was about 12, and I won Businesswoman of the Year. And there was this double-page spread in the newspaper, the picture of me with a bottle of champagne and, you know, Businesswoman of the Year, and blah, blah, blah. And Daniel was reading this and he said, "Mum, this can't be true." He said, "You haven't really got all these restaurants and this, you know, you don't really do any of this, do you?" And I said, "Of course, you know, you've been there, you've seen my office, and, you know." And he said, yeah, but I mean, I said, "What makes you think I don't?" And he said, "Because you're always here." And I thought, fooled you, you know, because the fact was he was at weekly boarding school, and he came home every weekend, so he never, and I was the boss, so I took weekends off. That's one of the great advantages of being the boss. So I was always there.